reason why it's important is because it will allow us to maintain affordability with reimagining Beaverview into perpetuity. And so we just ask that you would keep that in mind as you're deliberating and take that into consideration. And so we thank you for your consideration and thank you for your time this morning.
Okay, thanks, Tara. All right, anyone else? All right, thank you all for being here. We appreciate it. And of course, folks are probably aware we're not actually going to make any recommendations today. So today's kind of hearing the staff reports, having some chance to ask initial questions. So appreciate everyone being here, but we don't anticipate we'll make recommendations at the meeting this morning, just getting the process started. All right. I think we have some minutes to approve. From the March 28th meeting.
Move to approve.
All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right. And now we come to new business. And first, we're going to get an update on the ARPA home repair work that's happening. Nancy Williams is going to give us that update.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Pleased to bring an update on the ARPA funding. As a reminder, it's $400,000 that the county awarded to community development to allocate for home repairs. And so we had the RFP open in January on the 13th. The applications were due on February 24th. We had open office hours during that time frame and putting out weekly FAQs to keep everybody up to date with any questions that were asked by applicants. And then we had the staff review in February, March, overlap in there. And then we, with that piece, we did a full review through. So for the applications, we received 3. We received one from Asheville Area Habitat for Humanity asking for $375,000 in order to do 30 home repairs. So that would be an average of $12,500 a piece on average. And they target below 70% AMI. And in this project, their budget did not have, they were not asking for any admin costs, which we've addressed about how they handle that. So we also had an application from Collaborativa La Milpa for the Coda Emma Naturally Occurring Affordable Housing Repair Program. And they were seeking $365,000 to repair 24 homes at an average of $15,225 a piece and targeting less than 80%. They also had indicated, each applicant wrote this down into targeting whether it was under 30%, 50%, even though Emma was showing here, that's our upper limit, but they certainly are targeting much lower with these home repairs. You do see a lot of it being for seniors, who stay in their own homes, etc. And they had an admin cost right under 5% for that one. And then our third applicant was Mountain Housing Opportunities, who was asking for $120,000 for 4 units at an average of $30,000 with a 5% admin cost. So the goal on this funding was to maximize how much money we're putting into a unit versus how many units we can do necessarily. Because a lot of it is we're looking at how many homes can be improved or affect. So this was a little bit different because we're really looking at targeting at a higher amount, covering a couple different systems, being able to do much more than just 8,000 to 10,000 or 12,000 units. So it's nice to have that funding to be able to really do something within the home, not just do smaller repairs. So in this process, we had a collaborative cross-departmental scoring team, which was really nice. So we had some finance, we had actually our grant manager from strategy and innovation was part of the scoring team. We had somebody from strategic partnerships, and then somebody from strategy and innovation who's got experience with HUD funding and grants. And then we had our 3 from our department. So it's really nice. We got a lot of different perspectives. We could really, finance could really dig into, the information that was provided in the application. So in the scoring, we were really looking at how high you were targeting the funds and able to work with federal funds, because that's a whole nother level of working with reporting and the other federal requirements that comes with our work. So within that scoring, our top applicant was Mountain Housing, targeting up to 30,000 on just 4 units. And then Asheville Area Habitat had a strong application as well with their depth of experience and their experience with drawing down funds in a timely manner and the closeout process. And Collaborativa La Milpa, a great application, really strong for their work in the community, emphasizing outreach, and their experience with their repair team is wonderful. And they're still building on their experience level with federal funding. So in terms of the way the funding is allocated, our top score was Mountain Housing Opportunities. So they were fully funded, 120,000 for 4 homes at 30,000. Asheville Area Habitat was funded the remainder, which was only a portion of their 375,000 that they had requested originally. And unfortunately, we weren't able to then have any funds available for the third applicant. So the full amount of 400,000 has been awarded. The notices went out last week, and we'll be going to contract this month. Any questions?
I don't think so. Thanks for the update,
great.
Nancy. Appreciate it. All right. So we come now to the new construction funding applications, and Matt, I'll turn it over to you to get started.
Great. So there are a lot of slides, I do apologize in advance. And they are an attempt to bring out and highlight certain aspects of the staff report, which we've always released, and have a physical copy provided to you today as well. So kind of jumping right in, we have a variety of different construction funding requests. On this table, we've kind of broken them out by 9% projects and 4% projects. Those are all requests for loans for new construction. So they're the first 7 projects you see there. We had a request for a loan for rehabilitation project. So it's slightly different how you would structure that, but it is a loan request. And then we also have a construction grant request. So the total funding requests were just over 21 million to assist and support 660 households or units, depending on which type of project. And the total project cost would approach 190. So leveraging 21 million dollars worth of project. Before we jump into the individual projects, I thought it would be, we're always kind of looking for an opportunity to talk about LIHTC and how the projects work. And that is the bulk of the applications you'll receive and be reviewing today. So there are 3 significant recovery drivers, and we've heard a little bit of discussion about that, even though I had a comment already. The first is the LIHTC price per tax credit. The second is vacancy rates, and how that impacts the operating performance. And then obviously your permanent loan terms. So kind of your biggest pieces of financing, and then how you're able to acquire debt, right, with your operating performance heavily impacted by vacancy rates. So looking at LIHTC price per tax credit, it is important to remember that these are not fixed values, they fluctuate. It's a competitive kind of market in which you sell the tax credit, so that can be a varying amount. You are negotiating a price with the syndicate or investor. So someone is purchasing them, you're selling them, and you're negotiating it out. This has a very significant impact on performance. With each cent, it's a relative portion of equity that you're either gaining or losing. So as that negotiation occurs. So the North Carolina Housing Finance Agency in their QAP establishes what is a standard or allowable price per tax credit. So in the current pro forma, or in the current QAP, performers are accepted where the assumption is 90 cents or less, without question or need for evidence of that. So kind of at that high level, you can submit a project with a pro forma that shows 90 cents per tax credit, and that would be accepted, by the HFA. There are cases, and this was in the past, not kind of where we are currently with pricing, where you could submit assumptions that higher than 90 cents, but you would have to have better for that level. And that's an NCHFA requirement. They kind of set a ceiling of what they feel like is reasonable, and then that ceiling can be pushed up if you have commitment letters. And in looking at the projects, we received a range of them, and I'll show you those in just a moment. But recently you heard from DFI, who's our partner on our feasibility study, that reasonable prices currently are 85 to 89 cents. We kind of try to look at things through that lens and think about what is reasonable and to try to make the project in an equitable way without being in violation of what the NCH is about. And so looking at what has been proposed, so those first 7 projects, which are 9 and 4% projects, the performance that we received showed pricing per tax credit ranging between 83 and 91 cents. The project Fairhaven set up at 91 cents as a commitment letter at that level. The rest, we did not receive commitment letters, possibly that they have them, but not likely. At this point, in this table, you can also see the amount of credits that they are either seeking or have been awarded, and then the year in which they were awarded. That's helpful, as well as the impact on the faculty staff. So there's a formula that you use to arrive at what that impact is. But basically, at each pricing per credit, this is the amount of value that is created in the project. So just having that as a reference point as we kind of begin the conversation about each of these projects. Vacancy rates. So vacancy rates are the percent of units which will be vacant consistently, kind of over the life of the project. These have an impact on gross income, which impacts their net operating income, which ultimately impacts their debt service coverage ratio. So the higher the vacancy rate, the lower your permanent loan interest. So again, North Carolina Housing Finance Agency for these LIHTC projects, the QAP indicates performers are accepted where the vacancy rate is 7%. So that's saying that only 93% of the units are occupied. In staff review in our current market, our current demand for affordable housing, we look at the pro formas and analyze them at 7%. That's what QAP will allow. We also analyze them at 5 and 3%. In this round, we received pro formas that showed both 7 and 5%, depending on how they approach that. And we believe that it's reasonable to assume vacancy rates as high as 2%. But again, acknowledging for NCHFA, those pro formas are set at 7.
Matt, let me ask you a question about that. So since the state agency requires the 93% occupancy rate and nothing more favorable than that, I guess my question is it, even though I totally agree with you, like in reality, it will be more favorable than that, which means there'll be more revenue for these projects than what the pro forma shows at 93%. But for the purposes of the developers securing project financing, are any of the lenders or other investors going to be able to use that more favorable assumption in the project lending, right?
So really, it impacts, obviously, you can't receive any kind of loan from CHFA if you don't, or not, you can't make your tax credit, if you have an RPP loan also from them. Everything is built off of that 7% payment.
Right.
That's also the same for your permanent loan. You can't impact that debt service coverage ratio, but any soft lender, so the county, the city, the consortium, we can look at your cash flows, and that's what we're really after, is determining, yes, we understand that this is the debt service coverage ratio, you have to show it, maintain that level. But this is the reality of cash flow, which is how we can receive payment. So what we're ultimately trying to get at is, what is your capacity potentially, if you were, 97% occupied, to have funding available to make it, and potentially to your soft loan.
On a true cash flow availability basis. Okay. Thank you.
And we could, honestly, we could go higher than 3%, seems, conservative enough. 99% occupied is probably more likely to turnover than the units being recognized. But if 3%.
Okay.
The other big driver that we touched on just a little bit is the permanent loan terms. So different applicants are using different types of loan product. They're using different lengths of loans. Obviously, your permanent loans, you're repaying principal and interest. They're not soft loans. So they're demanding a principal and interest payment that's fully amortized schedule. And the interest rates are ranging depending on the product. So we just summarized in this table to kind of give you an idea of the amounts to permanent loans, the years, the interest rates that they're showing, if they're, what backing, federal backing they have to the loan, and then how much of a percent total capital staff that permanent loan represents. Again, very driven by vacancy rate, how much equity they, investment they're getting, if they have another type of RPP loan sitting, in the project. But again, just to kind of summarize, the range of interest rates from 5.73 to 8%, and different approaches to performance, whether you're being more conservative with equity pricing, whether you're being more conservative with your loan, interest rates, those have increasing impact on your staff. And then looking at construction loans, so we did have a couple of requests that exceeded the amount that the program will allow us to recommend. So as a reminder, HSP construction loan, the maximum amount is 10% of the cost per unit for any project. That's the baseline. You can go up to 20% if it's 4% low-income housing tax credit project. And you can go above 20% if the project is solely targeting households at less than 30% anyway. So in this round, we didn't have any that met that. You can go above 20% category. We do have the 2 4% projects. And this table just shows the funding request and the maximum amount allowed. The project, Redwood Commons project and the nursing home rehabilitation project, both were requesting more funds than the program would allow us to recommend for support. And in all cases, you could offer standard terms. These applicants have requested 20-year terms at 2% interest with annual payment from cash flow. Principal, we will talk about whether that is warranted. And in a couple of cases, actually, we requested the funds granted, which we cannot do with the exception of our Health Bank project. Are there any questions kind of about these overarching assumptions that we were trying to look at and ways in which we were trying to equalize, I think, the projects and provide some consistency in our analysis?
That's the only other question I have about just sort of assumptions. So we know that there's a huge shortage of developments in the community where the landlords will accept vouchers for projects, right? It's part of why we're supporting these kind of projects. So we want to see more, especially more multifamily projects where you accept vouchers. So And we know that like in these projects that get built, a pretty high percentage of the tenants will be likely to hold vouchers, right? Because again, there's this huge pent up need and there's a shortage. So from the projects the LIHTC projects that have been built in the past, we see there's a high percentage of residents who have vouchers. So for the residents who do have vouchers, of course, good for the developers for accepting them, but it's also good for the projects too, in a way, right? Because that means these folks who do bring vouchers in, they'll actually produce more rent for the projects than if they were simply, leasing to someone at 30% or 60% of the allowed, based on AMI. So it's good for the project revenues as well if you have a lot of folks who end up tenants who bring vouchers with them to the projects as well, which means you could have more revenue for your projects than the pro forma would be sort of allowed to assume, since you won't know that until you actually have your project built. So is that another variable that is going to affect how these projects play out into the future? That's not knowable now, so I know you can't but I'm just sort of asking about the different, like the occupancy rate, things like that will affect the actual ability of projects to repay investments in the future.
Right. So there are, I'll say a couple different things about vouchers. There are project-based vouchers, which is where basically a unit has an assigned voucher to it, right? So the housing authority will issue a project-based voucher. So you're holding those cannot be included in your CHSA format analyses. So in those cases, we would anticipate if they were ultimately provided and unapproved, those project-based vouchers, significant increased rents, but it can impact the upfront performance. And we didn't try to do a deep dive analysis on projects with project-based vouchers as a potential, because that's a lot of estimating. What we did cash flow analysis is just kind of the bare minimum on top of the project-based vouchers, what they showed in their performance, and kind of understanding that yes, that would create more cash flow and additional capacity to make the impact on the site. All of these projects, all of the LIHTC projects, are required to accept vouchers, and each of them provided an estimate that they anticipated would be kind of voucher volume in the project, which again, with increased revenue, that is not necessarily built into the performance, as they're not known to be receivable, but would again positively impact cash flow, which positively impacts the ability to pay some cash flow.
Thanks.
We will jump in then to looking at the projects. We'll look at the construction grant first, and then the rehab, and then all of the construction loans. The first two are kind of individual projects that are a little different from the rest. So we did receive a request for the emergency shelter for domestic violence survivors from Homemakes. We will be providing a site map for the rest of the projects. We did include one here, that kind of the anonymity of the site location, even at this stage of the project. The request was for $675,000 of the total project cost of $11 million, and then that total project cost is about $1 million for that operating, but not necessarily the capital need to construct that total project. We reference units here, and that's really the number of households that can be served, and they have a couple of different unit type structures within their facility. Basically, 27 households will be able to be served at any given time. It is not a LIHTC project. The development status in terms of approvals is in progress, and they currently own the site. This is not a rental type of structure. It is not a productive shelter. They did provide a breakdown, estimating about 150 households per year would be actively served. Now you all are pretty familiar with this project. It's just 6 months but largely the households that are homeless in that temporary kind of crisis situation as a result of domestic violence. And those are some of the other necessary kind of the breakdown there. Users of the facility. In looking at their capital stack, and you'll see this kind of slide throughout the rest of the project presentations, The way that we stack them is looking at local funds kind of at the bottom of the stack column, and then external funding from permanent loans, other loans and grants, et cetera, kind of on the top. So obviously this is a very heavily funded from local funds. There are committed funds, including $2 million from Buncombe County ARPA FRF grant. Again, the request is for an additional $675,000 from the Buncombe County AHSP grant. Dogwood Health Trust, the City of Asheville, and North Carolina Community Traffic Commission also granted funds to the project. There are additional requested funds, including $1 million capital campaign, and a few other grants from Federal Home Loan Bank, Neon Levine Foundation, as well as a looking at AMI levels assisted, and this was a question that we had in terms of our ability to provide funding for the project. And so we requested data from them on what is the historical income mix of the clients that you serve in your facilities and through your operations. And the majority of households that they've assisted are at less than 80% AMI. And so given the amount that's been requested of the AHP and the total project cost relative to that, we feel like this is something we can fund using the Affordable Housing Services Program funding based on the fact that the majority of their recipients, relative to the amount they requested over the whole project, are income eligible, non-moderate income. I will stress it is not a requirement to be a participant that you are low and moderate income. That's kind of the thing that we have to clarify is what is the real use versus what are the restrictions in access, and income is not. So looking at the unit mix or the bedrooms, so they are largely kind of a one-bedroom type shelter facility, but there are a couple of two-bedroom, or 6 two-bedroom and 5 3-bedroom units within that shelter. So in terms of recommendations, the committee may recommend a construction grant up to $675,000. That is the maximum they're allowed to access through the AHSP with their existing product. Or it is also possible, and this will be kind of a decision of the committee how they want to approach these things as we move forward, particularly in the next meeting. It is possible with some uncommitted and returned ARPA funds that you could recommend use of ARPA FRF grant funds to actually increase their initial goals they were in current recipient. Are there any questions about the emergency shelter application?
Just one question. In your memory, Matt, has something analogous to this kind of project been funded with program funds like this?
So the shelter funding, so non-revenue generating construction grant funding was added just a couple of years ago. This is the first application we've received and the first potentially funding. So in terms of thinking about impact, obviously creating additional funding or adding additional funding doesn't necessarily create another project, right? You're helping support a project that is already investing in. And in the staff report, we were pretty clear that there is a capital campaign that's anticipated to be conducted. Really, the request is accelerating the ability to create a project, right? It's an accelerant. You can move this project forward more quickly by reducing the amount of capital campaign. Right? So the project we feel like is strong and will proceed without funding. However, this will help the project to advance more quickly construction.
Got it.
So the next project, which is also kind of unique in its own category, is a construction loan request for a non-LIHTC project, the only one that isn't a LIHTC project. And it is a rehabilitation project, so taking an existing structure and rehabbing it into affordable housing. This was submitted by Swananoa Valley Christian Ministry with the Black Mountain Chamber of Commerce to work together on preparing the application. The request is $400,000 to support a total project cost of $1 million in order to create 16 units. So again, rehabilitating an existing nursing home and 16 units of affordable housing. The site map is located at 1114 Moncrief Road in Black Mountain. The proposed use is allowed, but they haven't sought any kind of approvals. They do not currently have site control of the site, although the property owner has expressed an interest in supporting affordable housing generally, and they did indicate that they would accept vouchers as part of the project. The anticipated impact is shown here. Again, Swananoa Valley Christian Ministry largely targets this population for service. They are looking to support individuals who have homes. They currently have no committed funding. They have requested $400,000 in an AHS grant. And they're showing $600,000 in unidentified loan and grants. So they provide a very detailed budget for staff analysis of the project. All of the units would serve households at less than 80% AMI. They have a mixture of unit types, but mostly one-bedroom units are proposed. In terms of recommendation, staff felt that with the materials provided in the application, we weren't positioned to recommend making a loan award at this time, but would recommend that the applicant seek rehabilitation construction loan in a future cycle once they have a more fully developed plan with more detailed budget, including costs and sources, as well as some more formal partnership agreements. So it's not necessarily clear what the structure of the whole project would be in terms of ownership, management, etc. So it's a very, very early in the project. At most, if the committee was interested in providing funding with the cost that they proposed, an award of $100,000 could be recommended because it's 10% of that total project. There's no questions about the nursing home. All right, now we'll get into the most fun, the LIHTC projects. So there are 7, and I will say that the whole team at Community Development has worked on analyzing these projects and putting together the staff reports. So I'll be picking up some presentations for Jonathan Jones, who's out of the office today. So he's worked on preparing some of these. Matt Card will be presenting a couple of these as well in the presentation. But we will jump right into these construction requests. The first one that we'll cover is Reimagining D-Review Phase 1. This is an application from the Housing Authority of the City of Asheville, who is, as I mentioned earlier, working with MHO to develop this project. The request is for $1.56 million of a total project cost of $22.5 million. This project creates 82 units. They have received the 9% tax credit award for the site, which is on D-Review Road. We have development status approval from the City of Asheville in hand. The site is owned by the Housing Authority and will obviously be accepting vouchers. 100% of the project will be voucher projects, and will have an estimated variety of mix across the other categories. Looking at the commitments, so in this pro forma, they're looking at the tax credit equity. They're showing 90 cents for tax credit in the pro forma. Again, DFI is suggesting 85 to 89 cents would be reasonable, but 90 cents is allowable at NCHFA. So that did dig too far into that or try to produce a different performer at the tax credit level. There is a Housing Authority deferred loan in the project. They have received City of Asheville ARPA grant funds. They have received an NCHFA RPP loan in addition to the tax credits to round out that project request from NCHFA. And then, as you're aware, there's a $935,286 ARPA FRF grant from the county. To complete the project, they have additional requests. They're looking at a $3.6 million permanent loan. They're seeking funding from Dogwood Health Trust. It's not clear exactly how that might be issued. Either as a loan or grant, I believe that there will be granted funds in the structure. They have requested $1.56 million from Buckingham HSC. Again, we can offer a loan product. We don't typically offer any kind of grant. That's not something we have in our program. But they have indicated that their preference would be that these funds would be granted in the structure. And then they're currently seeking another over $1 million in funds from the city of Asheville. Again, as a grant, I'm not sure what the reward that would be. The project did include a deferred developer fee at the maximum amount. So this project will include units at less than 30% AMI, less than 50% AMI, and less than 60% AMI. And it has a variety of bedroom types. The majority are one bedroom. That does include 2, 3, and 4 bedroom. Looking at the alignment with goals, so seeing kind of what this would impact in terms of unit creation, because the county already has committed funds through ARPA, it's not actually moving the needle if any additional funds are awarded, because those are already showing up in kind of that committed stack here. So it wouldn't be an additional unit impact, just go into supporting this already committed projects. So in terms of recommendations, the committee may recommend a loan up to $1.56 million with that 20-year term, 2% interest and annual cash flow. Or again, given that this application has received ARPA funds, has an existing application, it is possible the committee could recommend additional ARPA FRF grant funds. That amount is not the amount that we understand to be available from uncommitted and return funds is around $1.4 million. So it's not enough to provide a $1.5 million request, but that is a potential directly close to that. Are there any other questions about the reimagining review? Fairhaven Summit. So this is the CDCA's Project New Development Corporation of America. You'll recall this project is currently has an existing Rural Housing Services Program award attached to it. But the request is for an additional $545,000 to add to the FY23 $1 million award. Total project cost is $22.6 million. This is a 77-unit project. They have received a 9% tax credit. This project is located in the city of Asheville, and their development status approval is pending. The site is owned by the developer and Rural Accept Properties. Again, looking at the estimated impact and the percentages, again, those who have vouchers and each would be the biggest groups served. Looking at the committed funding, they have their commitment letter from their investors here, showing a 91-cent value tax credit. Stand 9.9 million in tax credit, 9.8 million in a permanent loan, this 40-year loan with a 6.17% interest. They have their existing $1 million commitment from the county. And then they have received a $400,000 consortium loan, which is a cash flow loan as well. They are requesting 500,000 from the trust fund loan, as well as this $545,000 additional HSP commitment. If there is interest in providing the additional funds, we would recommend that you kind of roll those two together as a single award, so kind of reallocating the 23 funding this project. They have a deferred developer fee at $284,250. The maximum they can defer is $15,750. So not the full maximum. And right now, just looking at the local fund commitment, with all that is committed and requested, we're sitting just over 10% of the project. The majority, over 40%, is from tax credit, and then the large balance is through the permit. So looking at the AMI levels assisted, some deeply affordable units at less than 30 and less than 50, but also including some units that was. And then this project includes the majority are 3-bedroom, but also some 2 and again, in terms of impact on goals, these are already shown that was today. There is a project that we can get some funding to, so that we're going to be moving the goals. The committee may recommend increasing the existing loan using the same terms that they were initially awarded. And just to acknowledge some of the funding support, so I know we talked a little bit about RF and some of the other projects, but this loan could be supported with general fund or bond fund. So the committee is positioned to recommend kind of regular budget request amount from the general fund or potentially bond funding to support this and the other LIHTC construction projects. Any questions about
Is it right on Sweeten Creek? I feel like I saw a site plan a long time ago, but.
yeah, so it's yes.
Okay.
And Matt, as you guys are reviewing these projects, I mean, obviously one of the other big variables is just like, what's it going to cost to build these projects, right? Because we're in this, construction costs have gone way up. These different projects are not all at the same stage of the development process. Some are very early stage, some are sort of more later stage, right? So I guess maybe just a high level question for all these LIHTC projects we're reviewing. Do any of them have like final construction contracts in place where that construction cost is really now a completely known quantity, dialed in, it's a committed number, or all of these still sort of like this is the developer's sort of best estimate? Because obviously we've seen these numbers move significantly. Some of these are projects we've funded before, and now they're back saying, hey, look, we need more money. So to what extent are these estimates versus dialed in numbers at this point, or committed numbers?
I would say always makes sense, right? Because even in the construction agreement pricing, there are things that can be modified. So, the farther along the project is, if they've already secured their tax credit and equity, if they have the majority of their capital stack committed, they're probably at a more final place. Because any kind of estimates are only guaranteed for a certain period of time anyway. And this is our pricing to this date. And so the closer you are, the more things that are already secured, the more likely your construction project is landing, or construction pricing is landing at price estimate. You're able to close faster. But as you get that project moved, the more secure you are.
Yeah.
Most of these projects are recently awarded or still seeking quite a bit of funding to make them reality. So those prices are not necessarily.
Do you know if this project is further along in that process than others? So this was a project that was in the previous, it was awarded a LIHTC approval like the year before,
it's a
right?
21 award. So they are the furthest along and probably kind of the most. They're the closest to beginning construction. That's what I'll say.
Okay. Yeah. So, I mean, we're all going to have a chance to like kind of sit down with staff outside this formal setting and kind of dig into the details of all these pro formas for all these projects. But I'm gonna just note, like, the amount of funding that different projects are requesting. I mean, they're dramatically different, right? So this is like this is a relatively very low cost project in terms of the amount of local funding they're seeking from sort of all local sources. So like the city, the county, home consortium. This is a project where basically they're saying, even though, hey, we're coming back asking for some more money, it's a relatively small amount to get a project of this, this one of these 9% projects done. And so part of the reason I'm asking that question is, like, do they have their construction numbers much more firmed up than others, other similar projects do at this point? And that's why they're saying, hey, we can make it work for this relatively low cost per unit investment.
I would say so. There's some slides later in the presentation where we look at the difference between the projects. I mean, there's so much variability. Site preparation can be so variable from one site to another. Flat topography versus the topography that we have here in Buncombe County can dramatically change that element of the costing. Also, the unit mix. Obviously, efficiency units are usually less costly to build as an overall project. They're just smaller. So there's so many different variables that drive the costing of a project. But we try to do a comparison to kind of identify, why is this project unit cost on average higher than this? Why, what is driving the difference for each type of project? And then ultimately you can incentive. Is there a feeling that we should provide the funding for the request level that is requested? So it seems, again, most of the recommendations are favorable in terms of funding at some level, but there are some qualitative differences, the real hard cost differences between the projects. And this year we have a lot more projects comparing each other, which is helpful in that regard.
Okay, great.
So the next project is Redwood Commons. This is the Buckeye Community Hope Foundation project. They have requested $3.3 million. This is more than the Horizon Services Program will allow. So reminder, up to 10% of the project cost. There is a little bit of variability in how we reflect total project cost. They included furniture, fixture, and equipment in their initial performance. We typically don't cover that. It's not a typical cost to include, but it's just slightly less here than they are than whenever it's reflected in some other locations. Just there. So an award of up to $1.826 million could be provided. This is a 70-unit project. It's a 9% lifetime has received the tax credit award. So it is farther along in the process, having already been awarded funds. The location is in the city of Asheville. The development status is pending. There is an option agreement on the site. It will accept vouchers. I will make a note about this one, so they have, as they've been doing more work on the site, identified some potential environmental issues that we're going to have to remediate or address, which has created the cost increase, initial estimates, and part of why they're requesting, most of the than they would normally anticipate.
Matt, sorry, can you elaborate a little bit on environmental, what you mean by environmental concerns or issues? Or
So there's a very extreme on site. There might be some potential contamination, just things that they would have to remediate. So they're in the process of doing the environmental assessments and what all that includes. But when you look at their detailed budget, they are reflecting things like either site preparation costs, additional professional services for remediation, some additional grading and site development actually part. Just in anticipation of if there is any remediation. So it's not 100% clear.
but phase one is probably underway, you think maybe?
I believe so.
Okay.
So when we talk about our affordable housing services funding guidelines, right? So that places sort of ceilings on the amount that we say like we want to invest from this pool of funding, right? But for some projects that have gotten like ARPA funding, you know, that's like funding that Buncombe County commissioners are like, we're giving you this money and it's a grant, right? So you don't even have to repay it. So it's even more favorable than like the Affordable Housing Services Guideline funds. We're not counting those funds as a county funding towards the project. So you could sort of double dip. You could get Affordable Housing Services funds plus these other funds, but not supposedly exceed the guidelines of how much funding the county's saying we think about being necessary for a project to be viable, right? So, and I'm not saying any of that's wrong. I just want to make sure I'm understanding the way this has sort of been sort of thought about through this process.
So when we talk about the leveraging of funds, right, like what we would not include if there's an ARPA allocation, the county dollar you're investing in the housing services sort of isn't leveraging an additional external. It's part of county funds.
Right.
So we don't show that as a leverage. However, the program is independent and stands alone. So if your maximum loan amount is $1 million and you receive $1 million in ARPA, you could still access $1 million loan. It's about the loan commitment, but obviously there is an awareness that you've already invested ARPA funding in the project and how you want to do that as a total investment. The program we're trying to show, here's the combined local commitment, because it's not just Buncombe County funds that are local. It would be federal funding, it would be consortium funding, and those are really local resources that are necessary to leverage the project. So again, what we're saying when we say recommend up now is what the program would allow is a standalone program, ignoring the kind of invested grant funding for other kind of sources.
Yeah. And so that's my understanding of it too. And I guess I just kind of wanted to sound out loud that, well, I think the guidelines make sense in these ways. Like we don't want people to just come and be like, hey, I want to ask for this one program to provide all the funding we ever need. Like we want people to try to, look to other sources, right? Try to put it together. That makes sense. But also at the end of the day, part of what we're trying to do is to think about like, what does it take for a good, well-planned project, especially a LIHTC project leveraging all these other funds, to be financially viable, right? So I guess I'm just saying at the end of the day, just for myself, like I think we do have to kind of look at all these different pieces. Like, hey, if this project got ARPA funding and this other one didn't, then the reality is, even if one is consistent with the guidelines, the reality is they're seeking a greater subsidy from Buncombe County to support their project than the other project, and it would seem a little bit arbitrary to me to see a project that's actually requesting less net funding from Buncombe County to be viable to be turned down when others have gotten more total funding per unit, even though it's technically consistent with the guidelines. So anyway, I'm just wanted to sort of sound that out because I think we're going to see this dynamic in play across different projects that we're looking at
On a spreadsheet.
just because,
Yeah.
largely driven because of this high construction cost environment that we have entered into. So anyway, that's not a question. I just wanted to share a few thoughts on that.
Yeah, it's definitely, and again, part of why we try to show and compare projects to each other. This is our 100% basis, but this project is looking at roughly 30% needed through the HSP and other local centers.
Right, which in the present environment, and even with their kind of some of these site issues they're going to have to work through, is actually relatively low total subsidy needed from sort of non-LIHTC sources, right? So, all right.
So looking at their committed funding, so they're making an assumption of an 87-cent price per tax credit. They could potentially go higher. And I will tell you, we've had conversations with this developer, entertained conversations with all developers about the staff reports that were provided. And so what we were looking at in analyzing this project particularly is it possible that this project would be feasible if we were to able to award you the amount of the program allowed, right? So things like, could we assume an 89% tax rate, that upper level end of what DFI is saying? If we did that and if NCHFA were willing to accept the RPP loan, not being repaid at all in the first year, and being a more soft loan, which they have in other projects, in different scenarios. If they could secure a different permanent loan than they provided, perhaps with a lower principal and interest. So those are the things that we analyze in order to see if the project is viable. We believe that to be a possibility if there is an award of that 1.8 threshold. But that is contingent on a lot of other things happening. And
I have one question on that interest rate. So on this slide 14 earlier, when you were looking at the permanent loans for all the different projects, I think there's a different number on that than there is on this page. So I just wanted to kind of, I think on the, so it's actually got an 8% interest rate. Yeah. So which is higher, I mean, than the other. So is that part of the staff's interest? There's like this, we know things have gone up, but how realistic is it to get that down?
It was the highest. So yes, that is an error on this slide.
It's okay.
It should be at 8%.
Okay.
So again, if you can get a lower interest rate loan, the amount of principal that you can receive is increased.
Right.
They're performing for good.
Okay.
And they are also seeking a National Housing Trust Fund loan as well at the current. So that's going through the process with the city. And their decision timeframes will be similar to ours, with most of that activity happening in April and into early May. So we don't have an idea there. We did share with, and it's included in the staff report, and we've been in conversation with the city about any project where they're indicated it's committed. Is this accurate? Is it being requested? Do you have an application? So their program is structured a little differently than ours. That is the maximum that's allowed under the program guidance they can seek from the city. However, in their program, it is written such that the city council itself can just decide to override that. So the program includes a provision to override the maximum for project viability. So that is another potential avenue where they wouldn't be in violation of their own program to issue an additional award. So we did note that in the staff report, mention that to the city of Ashland. We definitely don't want to put them in a different position, but they have more flexibility than staff can indicate on the county side. And also the cap, so that they'll take cap, or they will take soft cap in the way that they structured the program. And they are showing a near maximum deferred development, less than $4,000.
So let me ask this, Matt. I mean, at this point in the process, have the staff, I mean, if we said we're not going to do a variance from the guidelines, then 1.8 million is the maximum amount that could be approved, right? Have the staff ascertain that you think that there is a viable path forward if we limit it to that much? Or is it sort of like, there's still some different variables here, interest rates, maybe other numbers that could still move around. So I guess that's my question. Is, do the staff believe like we have high confidence that this project can be financially viable at that number, or is it's just not clear? It may need to be a bigger number for this project to be viable.
So what we tried to ascertain, in our first task, given the way that the sources were shown, a bigger amount from the county possible, is do we think there's any path forward for them to obtain the other sources that $1.8 million funding, $3 million request creates, right? It's creating a gap. There is not a source that they've identified. And so staff's work was to say, is there a path, a possible path? Yes, we believe there's a possible path, but it is reliant on higher equity pricing that they included in the initial pro forma, which is the negotiated rate, competitive thing that they are out there seeking to get the highest pricing they can secure against the tax bill. It may also require potentially a different type of financing, like a HUD-back loan, which adds some time. It also has financing costs. There are some more costs associated with that. So every little adjustment impacts the performance in a different way. But when we show the recommendation, which is award up to that amount, we feel like it is possible. Now, does that mean that if that amount is awarded, that they're going to go out and achieve all of that and not have another gap existing? I can't guarantee that. It's possible that a gap will still exist. And this developer is waiting to see what the recommendations from the county, if it's 1.826, less than that, if the city recommends 1.8 million. I mean, there are a couple of pretty significant asks that they need to understand, which will help them in the negotiation of other aspects of the project. So it is possible a gap would exist after an award from the county.
Did Redwood Commons seek home consortium funds?
They did not.
Okay.
Not in this one. I'll verify for sure. They've not been in the past. I believe they actually made applications for a different, maybe CDBG consortium funding.
They did.
Understanding the application cycle.
They did.
So they
Yeah.
didn't miss that one. That's like, next year.
Okay.
So looking at the AMI, so less than 50 and less than 60% AMIs we serve. These are largely one-bedroom units, with a few two-bedroom units as well. This is a senior project. So this one, the first one of our LIHTC projects that would actually move the needle on our goals, because we don't have an existing commitment on the project. For those would be the relative impacts on our goals and objectives. And so with the guidelines that exist in the board adopted program, the committee can recommend a loan up to 1.826 with a 20-year term at an interest rate of 2% annual cash flow with balloon. The applicant would need to identify those alternative source assumptions to complete the capital stack. So we're acknowledging that we think it's possible. They haven't given us a sources list on their own that shows they can close the gap. And this loan could be supported with general fund or bond funds through the Affordable Housing Services Program.
So let me just ask one other process question. So like the voters of our county approved these bond funds, right? So and as you said, like a project like this obviously qualify for either. For these projects that have this gap, right? If let's just say we're not going to vary from the guidelines, like we're going to hold to those guidelines. So we could fund a project like this up to the $1.8 million through the Affordable Housing Services Fund, limited to that guideline. The bond funds are new, right? I mean, this is like a new pool of funding. We haven't said that, I don't think, that like all of the affordable housing bond funds that will be programmed over the coming years necessarily all use the same criteria as the Affordable Housing Services Program funds. Or correct me if I'm misstating this, right? Because like I go to a lot of meetings, right? So I don't know that we've adopted more formalized policies around that because it's just, they were just approved in November. This is actually the first funding cycle that's open.
Yeah.
And I think we've even just as we were going into this, we're like, yeah, I mean, because a number of developers have asked, like, hey, can we apply for bond funds plus this? And
What the law says we can use them for is different, but the criteria, yeah, you're right. The
well, I'm just saying
criteria
it's a different pool of funding than the county appropriated Affordable Housing Services Program funds through our budget process. So, I mean, I'm just looking at this project. I'm glad we're doing everything we can to minimize the amount of net county funding we need to have a viable project. It seems like a good project to me. So I'm just trying to, I'd love to stay as consistent with our guidelines as we can, but I'm also just trying to think about like what we can do to have a viable project in a situation like this. So is that one potential process option to look at? And you don't have to answer on the spot if you don't want to. I'm honestly just thinking out loud around some of these different tools.
So with the bond funding, particularly for housing, because affordable housing had a very structured program, an avenue by which you could seek general fund dollars. We identified that as a way by which you can also access bond funds. Bond funds could potentially have other strategies and mechanisms to do that, but right now this is the one clear existing program with criteria and a way in which you I think that there will be potentially some strategy discussion about how else you might want to put or inject bond funds into affordable housing in your community, but right now this is the task. And because it's the board adopted program, we did discuss this with the applicant, right? Like, we recognize that you're indicating a need that exceeds the cap. But at the staff level, committee level, because the full board said we were comfortable with 10% of project investment, that's where the cap sits. And because bond funds are flowing through that program, that's kind of where the cap would sit for bond funds through that program. It doesn't mean that the bond itself could not have other avenues by which you could access it.
That's correct. And just to say, staff would want the opportunity to set up criteria and go through the process to create criteria to, allocate bond funds if we choose to use it in this pathway. Because currently we're operating under the fact that it's one all joint pool of money using that affordable housing services policy to cover that. That's not to say you can't change that.
Well, we haven't decided that though, right? I don't think that's an adopted policy that the bond funds will operate identically to I'm not saying it's necessarily a bad idea. I'm just saying I don't think that's an adopted policy at this time. The bond funds are.
That's the way staff is operating with that assumption that they're governed by that.
Yeah. Okay. And part of it is like, part of how I like the fact that we try to leverage funds. Again, of course, it makes tons of sense. But part of how I look at these projects too is like, what's the total local subsidy needed to make a project viable, right? If somebody gets some funding from the city of Asheville, good for them. But those are the same taxpayers that are paying the funding out of the county. They're county taxpayers too. So for some projects that are actually asking for less funding, less taxpayer funding, I just have a hard time saying we're not presenting a viable pathway for that project to be viable when they're asking for less taxpayer funding to do the same kind of project someone else is in a very similar project. So I just, for those reasons, and particularly just in this cost construction environment, where I think our guidelines make a lot of sense, but a lot has happened over the last couple of years too, that I just think we have to sometimes look at those realities and figure out, are there some strategies that may be needed to make sure we're not inadvertently preventing some really good projects from being viable. So anyway, I just share those observations for what they're worth.
And between now and the next meeting or part of that meeting, we can make sure that there's a really clear way to see projects, not because we do kind of 100% totals to show relative percentages, but what is the real county investment as a dollar? What is the real local investment as a dollar amount? What's the total project cost? So you can see, this is a $6 million county project. This is a $4 million. So that there's a very clear relative investment in the project. As well as a clear actual investment in the project. If it's not clear, some of the graphics that we. So that is what is the total county? What is the total local commitment? Not just relative to the project, but as a number relative to each other.
Okay. All right.
Sure you want me to present this? You interrupt your flow. Great job. All right, the next project we're going to talk about is Start Point. This is an MHO project. The total request is $850,000. The total project is $14.77 million. This project, the unit impact would be 6 units. It is inside the city of Asheville. It is at 16 Restaurant Court, is a site that's been looked at for a few years for various development, but MHO does now own this property. It is going through the approval process with the city of Asheville to get the conditional zoning for approval. They did go through the pre-application process with LIHTC, and they did receive a perfect score of 60 just recently. And as an MHO project, it will receive vouchers. This is a snapshot of the population served. It's pretty much a little bit of everybody. The total commitment so far is $850,000 for the trust fund. This is a 40-year, 0% principal deferred loan, I guess if you will, that will not need to be paid for 40 years. The request that they have currently is $2.2 million total loan, $850,000 request to HSP, and the LIHTC application there. They have $0 shown in the pro forma for developer fee, maximum date for the AMI levels vary with a little bit of everything. Most of the units will be one-bedroom units with some efficiency and some two-bedroom units as well. And this will actually, unlike some of the projects that Matt's already presented, will go towards the goal that there are very previous commitments for this project in the county. And you can see here the impact towards the goals and objectives of the HSP. So with all this information, we're going to may recommend a loan of $850,000, 20-year term, 2% interest, with cash flow. Questions? Moving on to the next project, it's Lake Shore Village. This is also a Mountain Housing Opportunity project. The total request here is $3.79 million. This is a project that has received approval. It is in the county, and it received approval about 2 years, I think, 2 years ago from the county. It is barely shovel-ready project, and I believe I heard MHO say that going back to the discussion about construction documents, I think that 90% of construction documents complete. The total unit impact is 120. And they did receive their 4%. That's that area in our slide. So they have received 4%. They do currently own the property. And again, as an MHO property, they will accept voucher. This is a snapshot of the population served. Pretty much a little bit of everybody. So what's been committed here? We have the 4% LIHTC, valued at about $16 million. They're using the pricing of 90 cents. And just to give you an idea of what maybe 1 cent would do, 1 cent of credit pricing is about $180,000. So if we need to 0.89 and say it's $180,000 for each cent of promotion. They have received ARPA funding from the county. They have received $750,000 in home and $665,000 in dogwood. What they're requesting right now, they're looking at a loan, 6% interest rate, $8.5 million loan. And they're also going back to dogwood and asking for $4 million. It's a little unclear what that might look like. Is that going to be a soft loan grant? We don't have. I think they said it's more than 2. And then the AHST request, 3.7, and they did not receive an additional $750,000. So those are the requested amounts that are still outstanding. They have shown in the pro forma $200,000 for developer fee, and they can a little bit more. Here's a snapshot of both AMI and the unit mix. Majority of their units will be 2-bedroom units and 1-bedroom units. There's prior commitments to this project, so that's why you're not seeing action or movement towards county goals and objectives. And so we may recommend a loan of up to $3.7 million. Soft loan, 20-year term, 2% interest, balloon payment. This loan could be supported with general fund or bond fund and or ARPA, FRF funds as well. Questions about this project?
So the villas at Haywood, this is a WPT development. So this is one of the two applications that are in the current NCHFA cycle. So the application is due in May. Starpoint is the other application. So the villas at Haywood has requested $843,178 for a total project cost of just over $12.8 million. This is a 52-unit project located on 19 Road. They are pending approval, county approval level. They do have an option agreement and will accept vouchers. This is a senior project. Those age 55 or older, with some voucher use anticipated as well as the direct income. The villas at Haywood recently received an award from the Home Consortium in the $290,000. Typically, those loans are 20-year national loans, so that normally expect. The villas at Haywood did provide, mentioned earlier, comment, the lowest of the tax credit values, so what you would consider to be very conservative, that's the stuff that they might be able to retain. They have one of the higher permanent low interest rates as well, which drove down with their ability to pay principal loan amount. They are requesting, again, $834,000 from the AHSP. What is interesting about this project is they requested $834,000 from HSP and they requested $834,000 from the Home Consortium. So that was a recommendation from staff, is if you're seeking funding from the city, county, or consortium, ask them for the maximum each program allows, so that as each award cycle kind of runs, we know what was asked, what was awarded, and what gap might still exist. So, at this point, with the pro forma that we initially received, if there is interest in providing funding support to this project, it would be the difference, based on that pro forma of $834,000 minus the $296,000 in home. The original gap was just that $834,000. They are requesting an NCHFA RVP loan, and they have indicated deferred developer fee, and they are correct. The maximum is not actually. The AMI levels assisted, so it is a mixed stacking of various AMIs, and it is a 1- and 2-bedroom project. This would provide impact to our housing goals and objectives, shown on this slide. And then the staff recommendation, so as was mentioned during public comment, based on the materials that we've found in the application, we don't think it's necessary at this point in the application cycle that they're in or where they are in the project to provide a loan award. Some alternative assumptions may result in them being able to submit a successful LIHTC application. So, for example, credit pricing at 90 cents, which is what is allowed, would be a significant impact in the amount of equity they're estimating in their sources. Looking at a different loan product or interest rate would potentially allow them again to increase that source in their project. Again, those are not known factors. So staff just felt like there was enough space at this stage of the project to make the application viable. The applicant has provided communication, which is part of the system received, that they could modify their project, provide some weekly affordable units, and had a different pro forma. That discussion happened last week, so it's not in a place that we can analyze fully another whole pro forma at this point. But the indication is that if the county is able to provide funding support, they can do a more deeply affordable project. But again, looking at sources and uses, trying to kind of equalize the projects and the assumptions that might be applicable. We did not feel that a loan would be necessary for the project to be able to move forward in the LIHTC application process. But certainly the committee could recommend funding at some level as well.
But it does have some committed home funding.
Yes. And that amount is $296,000.
So again, it's just kind of a high level question. I mean, sometime I want to sit down and dig into this in more detail, but just ask a question like, so a project like this, the total amount of funding being requested compared to the 9% projects that have already gotten their awards, like Redwood and well, all the other ones we just talked about, the amount of funding that's being sought is like much lower than the projects that are further along. So maybe this is like a crystal ball question. I guess part of my question is, I mean, this sounds like both of these new 9% projects, they both sound great. Love to see either of them happen, or both if there was a way to do both. Which probably isn't at the same time, at least not at the same time. But do the staff think it's realistic for these projects to be developed at the amounts of funding that are here, or does your crystal ball tell you that whichever of these projects gets the LIHTC award will be back requesting a lot more money when we're sitting here 12 months from now, because they're not going to be viable at these funding levels? Or, I mean, what would be different, I guess is my question. Like all these other 9% projects are saying, hey, we need $5 million, we need $9 million of non-LIHTC money for this project to work. And here's a project saying, well, we need like $843,000. So
it is difficult to anticipate what will happen in the future. I mean, like we talked about in the last application cycle, the interest rates for a permanent loan were things that no one would have anticipated, which created, tremendous gaps. So, there is a benefit to being conservative in your permanent loan estimates, right? So they're more conservative interest rates that we're seeing. They're much more conservative in their tax credit value.
but they're also indicating they need a fairly small amount of funding to then make the project work, even with those conservative assumptions. So,
right. And so, I mean, there are two ways, I think, to approach a project like this one with where they're at. And every project also has nuances. Again, site development costs, what your product is, how big your project is, how, again, having home consortium funding reduces the local commitment need from somebody else. There are two potential avenues, right? Like at this point where the project is, what is the minimum investment locally necessary for it to proceed to getting tax credit award? And then as the project moves forward, if some of these assumptions fall through, site development costs, construction pricing, their actual interest rate on their loan is higher than they estimated. They get 82 cents on the tax credit. So do you do less now, anticipating a potential that you need to be a gap funder in the next cycle, or do you provide a small investment now and again have the potential to need to be a gap funder in the next cycle? So as projects move forward, in the current environment, what we are seeing is that their first pass estimates have been lower, and they're trying to be, and I mean, I do applaud all of them that have come up with a very conservative estimate, but also, like, our efforts to try, how do we equalize it? How do we evaluate them all kind of at the same level? Unless unless they produce a document that said, this is our loan, and we have the commitment letter, and this is our tax credit equity, we have the commitment letter, we try to equalize them and say, what do you need from us today to make the project viable with your assumptions? And they're all assumptions, in fairness to all of the developers. And what their approach is, whether that's more conservative or not, impacts their whole project. So.
Yeah. Okay, let me ask you one other question. So I know there's some home funding allocated towards this, and the county participates in that process. So, so one of the things, we always hear from developers, it's like, hey, we need to see this like sign of local support, and we need a credible pro forma to go into, because we're going to be competing for these LIHTC allocations, right? It's very competitive. And then so a lot of times we're eager, like, hey, there's a good Buncombe County project, let's show support for it, let's make sure it's got the best chance. But then a lot of times we also see like projects that got like no local support do very well in that process and get funded. I think the Fairhaven project eventually, I don't think the city or county maybe had originally supported it, and and it still did very well, and now they are asking for funds, post LIHTC award. But I guess I just want to ask the staff, like, on this question of, I mean, obviously projects need to be able to present a credible proposal to the Housing Finance Agency for them to have a chance of being successful. But in terms of the scoring process, how important is it for that local support to be shown in the application? I guess is my question, right? Because I mean, just to be, completely candid, I mean, like at this like high level, like both of these 9% projects that have been presented, they both sound like great projects. And my hunch is that at the end of the day, assuming that there's no other, kind of issues, that they all go through a good due diligence process, if either of them gets a 9% allocation, like we're going to want to try to be supportive of it, probably. So we would, but probably only one of them is going to be selected, right, in a normal year. So I guess that's my question, is like, are we, by doing different funding amounts, like for different projects at this early stage, or funding one not the other, are we tipping the scales in a really meaningful way in terms of how the State Housing Finance Agency will ultimately make their competitive decision around which one to support? Because again, like at this early stage, I think I would say, like, whichever of these projects gets an allocation, I bet we're going to want to try to seriously consider what might be needed for it to be viable, right?
Right. So, and I failed to mention, so Villas at Haywood, in the pre-application, we have their scoring back, they have scored perfectly as well. So when you look at the project, StarPoint, which is seeking tax credit award, and Villas at Haywood have both scored perfectly. That is the official score.
Okay.
We understand anecdotally that local support is a favorable situation, but can I say, so let's say that the county decided to commit $850,000 to StarPoint. It also has an $850,000 award from the city that's existing, $1.6 million from local funding. And if you were to fund the balance of their initial request, along with home consortium, that's sitting right under $840,000. That's half relative to what StarPoint's open commitment is. Does that make or have bearing on the ultimate award? I can't tell you if it does or not. I mean, I think local commitment at any level is a positive aspect of the project, but their asks are different. So does having a commitment of more in one project versus the other make that project better? I can't say.
I appreciate your honesty.
But there is, already in both parties. So that is a positive, I think, in each case.
Okay. All right. Thanks for your thoughts on that.
All right. And then, so this is the last individual project we'll go through, which you're familiar with, so I won't belabor it. And then we'll do I have a few slides that do some comparison, show the projects relative to each other and all that. We'll get through those pretty quickly. So this is the Maribel project, formerly the Monticello Road project. We called this before, this is an LDG multifamily. The request, so their initial request was a little bit higher. They submitted a revised perform much earlier in the project So the request is 8.4 million. Total project cost is just under 50 million. This is now proposed to be 156 units. That was slightly higher in their initial application and award that was received. This is a 4% tax credit project to be requested. It is located off of Monticello Road. It does have development approval from the town of Weaverville. There is an option agreement, and it will obviously accept vouchers, and in fact, project-based vouchers have been requested. Again, they're new to our community, so their estimates kind of across the categories are less known or predictable for them, because again, we're asking to estimate based on their level of experience. They do anticipate a high volume of voucher users with project-based and non-project-based vouchers. They currently have a $1.5 million loan commitment that's standing. Again, if an additional award is warranted, we would collapse those into a single kind of award, would be the recommendation. There is a $500,000 home fund loan, so they received the full request that they asked. That was recently awarded just last month. Their project is structured a little bit differently in terms of how they've shown items in their portfolio. They're estimating 88 cents per tax credit in their LIHTC, so at $2 million for that. They're showing, because of the way LIHTC performance are structured, they can't indicate the project-based vouchers, which creates a very hard cap on their permanent loan debt. So they're showing a $12 million permanent loan and an $11 million mezzanine loan, which is basically a cash flow loan. So it's creating a significant cash flow loan that sits ahead of the county's request. And so the balance of their initial commitment to the total request needed, so the request from this cycle is an additional $6.98 million in affordable housing services program funds. What is anticipated, if they're ultimately able to move the project forward, and they have a revised performance change every hour. We've talked about this many times. So there's some different things they learned about project-based vouchers. They can include them in their LIHTC performance.
They can.
They cannot.
They cannot.
They cannot. So that does create this debt issue for them, having that smaller permanent loan. They would anticipate a fairly early refinance to actually create more permanent loan because they can reflect the project-based vouchers at that point.
And that's a state housing finance agency policy.
Yes.
Let's put that on our list to talk about next year.
And I do understand that because there is a HUD approval that's required, right? So it's not guaranteed, even if you have local approval, that you have secured them. So I understand kind of why they feel
But
that.
can you make it like contingent upon that? Okay, it's not our decision.
It does create a challenge. So they have a lot. I will say this project is going to show a lot of soft debts. When we get some of these comparison slides, it's going to look a little different than everyone else because they're having this issue with how they ultimately need this project work, which is what project is. A lot more cash and ability to take on. They are showing a maximized preferred developer fee on this project. So again, a mixture of AMIs at less than 30, less than 60, less than 80. They are doing 1, 2, and 3 bedroom units. So a mixture of unit types as well. Again, there's an existing commitment, so it's not going to move the needle if there are additional funds applied. But ultimately, it's not funded at that level.
It would,
the units as well.
It would move
I should say
backwards.
that about all of those. Any of them where it's not making an impact forward, it could be an impact backward if they are not able to ultimately obtain all the funding. So the committee may recommend increasing the existing loan up to the requested amount, which is 20-year term. And this loan could be supported again in general fund or bond fund. Are there any other questions about Maribel? Right, so the next few slides, we did keep them under 100. So I appreciate you going through all of these with us. We were like sitting right at that level. But again, just for perspective and kind of draw some different things between the projects, some things that Chairman Newman, you alluded to as you've gone through this project. So Just for perspective, where the site's located, there's often discussion about like geographic distribution and are we putting projects in different places and how we can create that community of affordability across the country. So looking at the expenses, so again, these are 100% calculations, so it's not the raw number, but how do projects compare to one another in terms of some of these major components? So land acquisition, right? So you're saying here, Reimagine Review, they already own the land, there was no acquisition cost. Site preparation is fairly consistent as a relative percentage, but construction costs are variable. You can see Reimagine Review has one of the higher construction costs relative to other things, but they don't have a land acquisition cost that's bumping that down. It's a relative cost. So just kind of giving perspective on, what this would help show is someone buying a really expensive piece of property. Is one of these sites particularly difficult to pair, grade, and develop? So again, Maribel has more site preparation costs than some others. So those are factors that will come into play. And again, just how are the projects structured. Looking at the capital stacks, so this touches on your point. It's not the raw numbers, which we will show you as well between now and the next meeting. But what are the local funds that are necessary for percent of the project? So in this scenario, as you already pointed out, the Reimagine U project is a very highly locally subsidized project, as is Lake Shore Villas. That's relative to projects like Villas at Haywood, Star Point, and Fairhaven Summit, which require a lower level of subsidy than some of these other projects. And how does the LIHTC factor into the project cost? So obviously Star Point is a shining one, the example where LIHTC is really heavily subsidizing. Part of that has to do with some of the costs for that project, right? And that project is those smaller unit sizes, a singular building on a project that doesn't really require a lot of site development cost. So in those cases, your LIHTC investment takes a bigger portion of the project. And also looking at permanent loans and how much permanent loan you're able to obtain. Again, all of that's based on your cash flow analysis, vacancies, what you're able to secure in terms of permanent loan, and somewhat how far along you are in your project and how conservative you're being with your interest rates. Looking at the products and units, obviously projects that have units are more costly. If you're building more, this is just to kind of point out, Villas at Haywood is the smallest of the project. Maribel is obviously the largest of the project, but both play in and factor in all the other costs that you're incurring. Some things are better, you can spread them across more units. Some things are more costly, you should do more things. And looking at the unit mix, obviously bigger units increase costs because you're having more square footage per unit. So where you're including 3 and 4 bedroom units, those are more costly to produce than a 1 or 2 bedroom. Now again, some costs in the kitchen are fixed across most of those unit sizes, and those are some of the bigger costs. So it's variable. If they do cost more, it's more square footage. And obviously, Start Point again, having those efficiency units helps to make the local investment lower. And then looking at the amount of Affordable Housing Services Program funds invested or requested relative to the total average unit cost. This is funds and divided all the units by that, and you took all of the funds that they were putting in their sources and divided all of the units by that, and how much per unit been requested. This speaks a little bit to, I think, the question earlier about how much are we really in for, but it's not showing the value for the total project. So Maribel, more expensive overall unit cost on average, and a higher amount requested from the county per unit. And again, Star Point, lower, the lowest investment per unit to produce, partly because of the efficiencies, the lowest amount per unit from the county requested. So giving some perspective here and trying to understand why those are the cases.
Matt, that's a great graph. Brownie, would it be helpful to one of your points earlier, if we could kind of redo this to include like ASHTO funding? And
Yeah, I kind of do that myself.
You already do it in your head, yeah.
It's, I don't know if it would or not.
Maybe help me.
To me, maybe we should.
Yeah.
I mean, part of it's kind of like just how we think about the leverage, right? On the one hand, we applaud it because we want people to say like, hey, don't just look to the Buncombe County's program, go out and, bring in other funds. But on the other hand, so we kind of reward it and encourage it as we should. But on the other hand, it's like, well, what's the total local taxpayer subsidy required? So some of the ones actually would have less taxpayer subsidy
Right.
than others. I mean, there's less leverage, but they're actually also seeking less. So I don't know. In some ways, I think we should applaud those who try to seek ways to minimize local taxpayer subsidy, while also, of course, encouraging the leveraging. So I mean, we're trying to kind of have our cake and eat it too. At least that's.
Yeah.
But I think that's okay. We can kind of think about them both as like the favorable aspects of leveraging, as well as like, okay, what's the total amount local taxpayers would need to pony up for this project to, to get done. So yes, I think we probably should.
Yeah. Just to have one more data point.
We can amend this to include county HSP, county HSP commitment, city consortium, and we can show the local breakdown, kind of the cost. We can also do a total project cost. I think that those are two kind of different things. They're going to show the same relative percentage, but what is the actual local taxpayer dollar commitment for this whole project as $1 million amount? How much are we investing in each unit as in tens of thousands of dollar amount? So we can bring both of those back to you in between now and the next meeting.
Thank you.
And then, so here is the cash flow analysis. So this is probably the most grim of all of the slides, really at all levels. And so what we try to do here is look at what has to be paid back as kind of a soft debt. There's deferred developer fees. So if they included that, they're paying themselves back from anything that's not part of that service ratio. They have to be able to show, just so that I make that clear, that they can pay themselves back in the first 15 years. And we typically allow them to pay themselves back first. So they get their first bite because they have that threshold and they have to be able to pay themselves back. That's an NCHMA requirement. So they take the first years of cash flow until they're exhausted, and then we share the balance, any other soft loans after that. So what we try to show in the next set of slides is the amount of cash flow that we are anticipating at the vacancy level that's shown, the total deferred developer fee, the soft loan principal, and assuming that they don't make any prepayment of principal, the total amount of soft loan interest that would accrue over the 20-year period, right? So we're looking at what are your nets that exist and what is the cash flow that's available to you. So 7% things don't look great. We need to make sure that there is enough cash flow to repay. That's going to have to exist at 7%. And in all cases, if there is deferred development fee, that does. But then there is also a soft loan principal amount and soft loan. So all we can demand is the repayment of interest. So if it's a soft cash flow loan, we cannot demand any principal payment. They can elect to make that payment. But looking at these projects, you can see that in the 7% vacancy scenario, only Fairhaven Summit has enough cash flow to eventually pay the deferred developer fee, the soft loan interest, and possibly, if it elected to, the soft loan principal amount. In all other scenarios, there is not sufficient cash flow to make those payments. And so when you get to the end of 20 years, whoever has a soft loan, you're going to have the principal balloon as well as some accrued unpaid interest. So just being really transparent about that. There is some capacity for repayment, but it may not be sufficient to cover even the interest that would pay on the project. you are kicking the decision down the road, in that case, meaning that you have, that board or that staff have to address it between year, it's in the parents to refinance the project, they want to refinance and pay you out, hopefully request forgiveness. So anything that's unpaid is a balance that you have to deal with at your time. So I won't belabor the point on the 5% and 3%, but we did do those calculations. So again, the lower your vacancy rate, the more cash flow you have, the better position you are to make repayment. That's all of these things. That is all the construction information that we could muster putting into one presentation. I apologize for not having information. Why we have one meeting to just do those. Our next meeting will be on the 25th, where we'll discuss the applications and recommendations. It is requested that allocations be recommended at that meeting, particularly for the general fund purposes. Budget request to know how much the request would be. Our standing request has been 2.3118. So that's standing general fund allocation that we also keeping in mind that I guess it's possible you could recommend on other non-general fund activities later, mostly bond fund supported. But some of these projects are in an application cycle, so the lack of making a decision may also impact those projects. So ideally, you'd be able to allocate or make recommendation for allocation at the committee level on that meeting on the 25th. And we will, staff is, as you mentioned, doing one-on-one meetings with you to go through, questions about projects, discuss the performance analysis and other assumptions in between that time. Just as much information as we can.
Can you highlight, I guess, the projects that might not need general fund dollars, but are under some deadlines during those meetings for us? Okay.
And we will also have a chart for you that we'll bring back to the meeting on the 25th. That's like, this is the list of projects. These are the ones you can fund with AHSB. These are ones you can fund with ARPA. So it will just be a few cells highlighted if it's constrained. Bond funds are only construction, so none of those other program types can be used with bond funds for. So we'll also have that, and we'll highlight which ones are in an active application with the other needs. I will mention May 2nd is our regular meeting. Staff is going to be participating in a Bringing It Home conference. So with the addition of homelessness position, it's currently unfilled, and are becoming more involved in that process. That is our state conference on homelessness. So given the volume of meetings you have and activity, and the fact that staff's going to be at a conference, we're proposing cancellation. That's the committee, but we can discuss that on the 25th meeting. And that's all we say.
Matt, everybody, thanks so much. Ton of information. So appreciate everyone's work on all the analysis that's gone into this already, and the overviews today. So are there any other questions this morning?
Just FYI, I'll be virtual on the 25th.
Okay.
Those are all my questions.
All right.
Okay.
And was there anything else on our agenda, Matt, or is that everything? Okay. All right.
Thank you.
We're adjourned. Thanks, everybody. Appreciate it.